She warned me with a trembling voice, "You're playing with fire." But the truth? I'd rather burn for one night with her, than spend a lifetime without her. I had lived in this neighborhood for nearly 2 years, and nothing ever really changed here. The same trimmed lawns, the same quiet evenings, the same smell of barbecue drifting across the street on weekends. Until she arrived. I first noticed her on a late summer evening, when the air was still warm but the sun had dipped low enough to paint everything in amber. She was standing on her porch, watering the small flower beds by the steps. At first, it was the way she moved that caught my attention, steady, deliberate, as if every gesture had a quiet grace to it. She looked to be around 40, maybe a little older, but it wasn't her age that struck me, it was the way time seemed to have carved elegance into her. Dark hair tied loosely, a few strands falling against her cheek. A light cotton dress that swayed just enough in the evening breeze. She didn't look like the women I knew, rushed, distracted, always somewhere else in their minds. She was present. The sound of water dripping from the can filled the silence between us. I found myself leaning on my porch rail, pretending to check my phone, stealing glances when I thought she wouldn't notice. But then, she did. Her eyes lifted, and for the briefest moment, they met mine. Not the hurried, accidental kind of glance neighbors exchange, but something slower, heavier, as though she was quietly taking measure of me. It felt like my chest tightened under that single look. She didn't smile, not yet. She simply returned to her task, but the corner of her mouth tilted, just enough to make me wonder if she had caught my clumsy attempt at nonchalance. The night settled further, cicadas buzzing faintly in the trees, and the smell of wet earth rose from the flower bed as she finished. She turned toward her door, pausing, her hand resting against the frame. For a moment, her silhouette held still against the soft porch light, and then she disappeared inside. I stayed on my porch long after, staring at the spot where she had been, with the odd feeling that something had shifted in the quiet rhythm of my life. I couldn't name it yet, but I knew, this wasn't going to be just another neighbor moving in. This was the kind of presence that lingered, even when she wasn't there. And I had no idea then how dangerously close I already was to the fire. The following mornings, I noticed she kept to her routine. A cup of coffee in her hand, a quiet moment on the porch before the day unfolded. It became almost ritualistic, the way she sat there in her robe, hair gathered casually at the nape of her neck, her gaze distant yet thoughtful. I tried not to stare, but something about her presence drew me in, like the way warmth lingers long after the fire has burned out. I began taking my coffee out at the same time, pretending I just wanted the fresh air. Truth was, I wanted proximity, even if it was across the lawn. One morning, fate offered its first hand. She noticed me watching and lifted her cup slightly, a small gesture, almost like a toast. I returned it, grinning without meaning to. For a moment, her expression softened, a faint smile, reserved but undeniable. That was the first acknowledgement that passed between us, fragile and unspoken, but real. Later that week, an excuse finally came. I was wrestling with a stubborn wrench on my old bike in the driveway, when her shadow fell across me. "Need another pair of hands?" she asked. Her voice was steady, rich with a kind of calm that instantly made my fumbling feel obvious. She handed me a small tool from her box, one she must have kept in the trunk of her car. Her fingers brushed mine in the exchange, light, casual, but it jolted through me like static. She pulled back almost too quickly, as if the touch hadn't happened at all. But I felt it. As we worked side by side, she kept conversation polite, careful. She told me her name, a detail I turned over in my mind like something precious. When I asked if she liked the neighborhood so far, she gave me a half-smile. "It's quiet," she said, and then after a pause, "maybe a little too quiet." The way she said it carried weight, as if quiet had been both her refuge and her prison. When the bike was fixed, I thanked her. She nodded but added lightly, "Don't get used to this. I'm not exactly the neighborly type." The words were meant as a boundary, a reminder of distance. Yet her eyes betrayed her, holding mine just a moment too long before she turned back toward her porch. I stood there with grease still on my hands, heart pounding, realizing she wasn't just building walls, she was also leaving cracks in them. Cracks wide enough for light to slip through. And I found myself wanting to step closer, even if she didn't want me to. It was close to midnight when I saw her again. The neighborhood was still, the kind of silence that carries every small sound, a dog barking faintly blocks away, the distant hum of a car on the main road. Her porch light was on, but dim, casting a soft golden circle around her. She sat on the top step, a shawl loosely draped over her shoulders, a glass of red wine resting on the step beside her. She looked different in that moment, less composed, more human. Almost fragile. I hesitated, standing on my own porch. Part of me knew I should leave her to her solitude, but something about her posture, the slight curve of her back, the way her gaze lingered on the night sky, felt like an invitation. Or maybe I just wanted it to be. I crossed the street slowly, my steps crunching against the gravel. She noticed me halfway across, her head turning. There was no surprise in her expression, only a quiet acceptance, as if she had already known I would come. "You can't sleep either?" I asked, my voice low so it wouldn't shatter the calm. She exhaled, a sound between a laugh and a sigh. "Sleep and I aren't exactly friends these days." I sat down a step below hers, careful to keep a respectful distance. For a while, we didn't speak. Just shared the silence, the faint breeze carrying the scent of jasmine from her garden. Then, her voice broke the stillness, quiet but deliberate. "You're playing with fire, young man." I turned to her, the weight of her words settling between us. Her eyes, sharp, steady, but lined with something weary, didn't waver. She wasn't teasing. She was warning me. Her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the shawl. "I've lived long enough to know how these things end. Curiosity, glances, late-night talks. They don't stay harmless for long." There was a tremor there, subtle but real. She was afraid, not of me, but of what we both already felt beginning to stir. I wanted to answer, to tell her she was wrong, that I wasn't just another fleeting distraction. But the words tangled in my throat. All I could do was look at her, and in that look, I think she saw the truth I couldn't yet say. The night pressed closer around us, heavy with things unsaid. And though she turned her gaze away, her warning lingered in the air, echoing like the crackle of a fire I was already stepping into. The silence after her warning stretched on, like a wire pulled too tight. I could hear the faint creak of the porch settling, the distant rhythm of crickets, even the soft clink of her wine glass as she shifted it against the wood. I sat there, just below her, feeling the weight of her words sink deeper. "You're playing with fire." She had meant it as a line to end things, to create distance. But instead, it pulled me closer. She finally turned her head, eyes catching mine. There was no anger there, only something sharper, something torn. "You don't understand," she whispered. Us, it can't happen. I'm older. I should know better." Her voice cracked on that last word, and for the first time, she looked less like the composed woman who stood tall on her porch and more like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, afraid to jump. I leaned in, slowly, not enough to invade her space but enough so that she could feel the seriousness in my voice. "Then burn me tonight." The words fell between us, heavy and unshaken. Her eyes widened, not in shock exactly, but in disbelief, as if she hadn't expected me to meet her fire with flame of my own. For a long heartbeat, neither of us moved. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the glow of her porch light, the faint smell of wine and jasmine, and the sound of her breathing, unsteady now, quickened. She let out a low laugh, though it was hollow, almost trembling. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Maybe not," I said softly, my knee brushing against hers as I shifted on the step. The touch was accidental, but the effect wasn't. The small contact sent a current through me, and I could tell by the way her breath hitched that she felt it too. Her hand gripped the edge of the step, knuckles whitening. "This isn't fair," she murmured, almost to herself. "You have your whole life ahead. And me? She stopped, unable to finish, as though naming her own fear would make it real. I wanted to reach for her hand, to ground her, to show her I wasn't running. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I let my words carry what my touch couldn't. I'm not afraid of the fire. I'm afraid of walking away and never knowing what it feels like. Her eyes softened then, flickering with something she couldn't hide any longer. For the first time, she didn't move away from me. The fire she warned me about, I could see it in her, glowing faint but undeniable. And I knew I'd already chosen to let it consume me. The air felt heavy that night, thick with the kind of stillness that often comes before a storm. We sat there on the porch steps, the unspoken tension pressing closer than either of us dared admit. And then it happened. A low rumble rolled across the sky, and within minutes, the rain began. At first it was soft, scattered drops tapping against the wood, but it grew quickly, turning into a sudden downpour that washed the night in silver. She let out a startled laugh, rising to her feet as the rain sprayed across the porch. "Well, there's your fire," she teased lightly, holding her shawl above her head in a poor attempt at shelter. It was the first time I had heard her laugh, really laugh, unguarded, bright, so different from the quiet restraint I had grown used to. I stood with her, both of us pressed under the narrow awning as the rain hammered the ground only a step away. The scent of wet earth and jasmine rose around us, mixed with the faint warmth of her perfume. For a moment, the storm outside felt less powerful than the one between us. Her hair had slipped loose, damp strands clinging to her cheek. Without thinking, I reached up. My fingers brushed gently against her temple as I tucked the strand back behind her ear. She froze. Not in fear, not in rejection, but in hesitation. Her eyes lifted to mine, wide, questioning, almost pleading for me not to break the fragile moment. Her breath came shallow, and I could feel the warmth of it against my skin. My hand lingered near her face, not touching, just close enough to feel the pull. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. The rain pounded harder around us, a curtain shutting out the rest of the world. Time slowed. It was just her and me, caught in the space between caution and surrender. Finally, she exhaled, lowering her shawl. "You don't make this easy," she whispered. I gave the faintest smile. "Neither do you." And then she did something I hadn't expected. She let herself lean just an inch closer, close enough that her shoulder brushed against my chest, close enough that I felt the weight of her choice pressing into me. It wasn't a kiss, not yet. But it was more than enough. The fire she had warned me about was no longer a threat in the distance. It was right here, standing beneath the awning, flickering between us in every trembling breath, every lingering glance. And neither of us moved away. The rain didn't let up for a while, and by the time it softened into a drizzle, she quietly opened her door and gestured for me to step inside. I followed, careful, as though crossing into her home was somehow crossing a deeper line. Her living room was warm and softly lit. Lamps glowed against tall bookshelves stacked with novels, framed photographs sat turned slightly away, and on the table, a bottle of red wine stood half empty with two mismatched glasses. It was a space that felt lived in, but also, lonely. She slipped off her damp shawl, hanging it over a chair, and poured a little wine into the second glass. "You may as well have some," she said, her tone lighter than before, but her eyes carried a weight that never left. I took the glass, but I barely tasted it. I was too aware of her, the way she curled into the corner of the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, her hair damp at the ends. She wasn't the poised, untouchable figure I had first seen on her porch. Tonight, she was softer, quieter. Human in a way that made my chest ache. She stared at the rim of her glass, tracing it with her finger. I used to love nights like this. Rain, wine, a book. It used to feel enough. Her voice dropped. Then life happened. Marriage that broke before I even noticed it was cracking. Friends who stopped calling. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Her last word hung in the air. Invisible. I set my glass down and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, giving her the silence she needed to spill the things she'd clearly never said aloud. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You probably think I sound pathetic. No, I said immediately, my voice firm but gentle. I think you sound real. She glanced at me then, eyes wet with something she quickly blinked away. It was the first time she let me see the fracture lines beneath her surface. I reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cool, her fingers tense at first, but then she let them relax under my touch. My thumb traced a slow, steady circle across her knuckles. The clock ticked faintly in the background. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, something else was forming, a fragile trust, a moment neither of us wanted to break. Her shoulders softened. For the first time, she didn't look like a woman warning me away. She looked like someone who wanted, desperately, to be seen. And in that moment, I knew I would never let her feel invisible again. The hours slipped by without either of us noticing. The rain outside had ended, leaving only the soft patter of drops sliding down the windowpane. The storm had passed, but something in the room still carried its charge, the kind that lingers even after the thunder has gone. She sat beside me now, no longer tucked away in the corner of the sofa. Our shoulders touched lightly, the kind of closeness that didn't need permission anymore. The wine glasses sat half empty on the table, forgotten. What mattered was the way she leaned back, her head tilting slightly, as though she was finally allowing herself to rest. For a long time, we didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary, almost too fragile for the stillness between us. Instead, there was the steady rhythm of our breathing, the soft glow of the lamp washing her face in gold, and the quiet creak of the old sofa as she shifted closer. Eventually, she let out a small, weary laugh, almost under her breath. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she whispered. I told myself I was done with all of it. Her hand tightened briefly around mine, as though admitting the truth made her vulnerable again. I turned slightly, looking at her, really looking at her. The strength in her jaw, the tiredness beneath her eyes, the grace in the lines time had etched across her skin. Then maybe, I said softly, it wasn't something you were supposed to end. Maybe it was just waiting. Her gaze met mine, and in it was something unspoken, relief, fear, hope, all tangled together. She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she let her head fall gently against my shoulder. The weight of her there felt steady, grounding. Her cheek was warm, her hair still faintly damp from the rain, carrying the scent of jasmine and wine. I lowered my head slightly, breathing her in, not daring to move, afraid the smallest shift might break the spell. The clock ticked quietly. Minutes stretched, the night thinning into dawn. Pale light began to seep through the curtains, painting faint streaks across the room. It felt like the world outside was waking up, but here, inside, time had slowed to something entirely our own. She didn't lift her head, and I didn't ask her to. We stayed that way, silent, close, unguarded. Not fire-consuming, not fear holding back, but something gentler. A warmth neither of us had expected, but both of us desperately needed. And as the morning sun rose, I understood, sometimes, playing with fire doesn't mean destruction. Sometimes, it means finding the light that guides you home.